The air in the UA Sports Festival Stadium was bitterly, unnaturally cold. It was the kind of cold that seeped past the fabric of the UA gym uniform, past the skin and muscle, and settled directly into the marrow of the bone. It was the physical manifestation of Shoto Todoroki's pain, an icy fortress built from a decade of resentment and abuse, projected outward to keep the entire world at bay. Izuku Midoriya stood shivering in the center of the ruined concrete arena, his breath misting in the freezing air. The stadium, filled with tens of thousands of cheering spectators, felt miles away. The roaring voice of President Mike booming through the loudspeakers was nothing more than a dull hum beneath the frantic, hammering rhythm of Izuku's own heartbeat. Thump. 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 He looked down at his right hand. It was a ruin of flesh and bone. His middle finger was swollen to twice its normal size, the skin stretched taut and painted in grotesque, mottled shades of deep plum, indigo, and sickly black. The index finger was no better, bent at a horrifying, unnatural angle. The pain was not a sharp, sudden thing anymore. It had evolved into a deep, throbbing agony that pulsed in time with his racing heart. Every time the blood pumped through his veins, it felt like liquid fire trying to force its way through shattered glass. He had broken his own body just to survive the opening minutes of the match. One for all, the sacred torch passed down to him by All Might was a power too vast, too ancient, and too furious for his 15-year-old vessel. At 5%, it was a manageable enhancement, but to shatter Todoroki's towering, stadium-sized glaciers, 5% was nothing. He had to draw upon the full, unadulterated might of the stockpile, 100%, focusing it into a single appendage, knowing full well the recoil would obliterate his own bones. It hurts, Izuku thought, his teeth grinding together so hard he tasted copper. It hurts so much. I can't make a fist. I can barely feel the tips of my fingers. Across the arena, surrounded by jagged spikes of frost, stood Shoto Todoroki. The dual-haired boy's breathing was heavy, ragged. Frost had begun to creep up the right side of his face, tracing along his jawline and creeping toward his stoic, mismatched eyes. His movements were slowing. The continuous, unmitigated use of his ice quirk was plunging his own core body temperature into dangerous, hypothermic levels. Why? Todoroki asked, his voice a hoarse, icy rasp that barely carried over the howling wind of the arena. Why are you doing this? You're broken, Midoriya. You can't fight. You're just destroying yourself. Izuku's eyes, bright and emerald green, locked onto Todoroki. Despite the agony tearing through his right arm, despite the exhaustion pulling at his limbs, there was an inferno of resolve burning in his chest. Because you're shivering, Todoroki, Izuku shouted back, his voice cracking but ringing with an undeniable truth. Quirks are physical abilities. There's a limit to how much cold your body can take, and you could solve it instantly, right now, by using your left side. But you won't. Todoroki flinched, his eyes narrowing in furious denial. I will win with my mother's power alone. I will completely reject him. It's not his power. Izuku screamed, the words tearing from his throat, fueled by a desperation that had nothing to do with winning a tournament. It's yours. Your quirk, not his. Up in the stands, the number 2 hero, Endeavor, gripped the steel railing of the spectator box. His immense flames flared, melting the plastic of the seats nearest to him. His fierce, turquoise eyes were locked onto his masterpiece, his youngest son. He didn't care about the green-haired boy. The boy was just an obstacle, a whetstone against which Shoto was meant to sharpen his blade. But Midoriya's words reached him, echoing the very thing Endeavor had been waiting to see. High in a different section of the stadium, hidden beneath a baggy yellow suit, Toshinori Yagi, All Might, leaned forward, his skeletal hands gripping his knees. His hollow, shadowed eyes were wide with a mixture of immense pride and profound terror. Young Midoriya, All Might thought, his heart aching. You're trying to save him. Even in a tournament, even when you should be aiming for the top, you're looking at your opponent and seeing someone who needs rescue. You have the true heart of a hero. But your body can't take much more. Down in the booth, Eraserhead sat in uncharacteristic silence, his dark eyes tracking every micro-expression, every twitch of muscle on Midoriya's frame. Beside him, President Mike had momentarily stopped his lively commentary, sensing the heavy, suffocating shift in the atmosphere. "Eraser," Mike whispered, covering his microphone. "The kid's gonna kill himself." "Should we call it?" "Wait," Aizawa replied, his voice rough. His finger hovered over the buzzer that would end the match. Midoriya isn't acting out of blind stubbornness. He has a goal. But, if he tries to use that broken arm again, I'm stopping it. In the arena, the temperature plummeted once more. Todoroki, provoked and pushed to the absolute edge of his emotional endurance, slammed his right foot into the concrete. "I'll end this," Todoroki whispered. A glacier, larger and denser than any he had created before, erupted from the ground. It didn't just slide forward, it exploded outward like a jagged, crystalline tsunami, towering high above the stadium walls, blotting out the sun. The sheer mass of the ice cast a dark, freezing shadow over Izuku. The air pressure dropped violently. The crowd screamed in a mix of awe and terror as the ice threatened to breach the spectator stands, only halted by the reinforced energy barriers surrounding the ring. Izuku watched the mountain of ice descend upon him. Time seemed to slow. "My right arm is useless," Izuku analyzed, the tactical part of his brain operating at lightning speed despite the panic. "If I use it again, I might lose the arm entirely. Recovery girl warned me. The damage will be permanent." He looked at his left hand. 2 fingers remaining. "I have to do this. I have to break through. I have to reach him." Izuku pulled his left arm back, tucking his thumb under his middle finger. He didn't invoke 5%. He didn't invoke 10. He opened the floodgates of One for All, letting the torrential, golden energy rush into his single, fragile finger. The skin began to glow with a terrifying, violent pink light. The veins bulged. Smash! Izuku flicked his finger. The sound was like a cannon firing inside a closed vault. The shockwave erupted from Izuku's hand, a solid wall of kinetic energy that slammed into the incoming glacier. The impact shattered the ice instantly, reducing the multi-ton structure to millions of diamond-like shards that rained down upon the stadium. The force of the wind pressure tore through the arena, ripping up slabs of concrete and sending them flying into the walls. Izuku screamed. The pain was blinding. His left middle finger was now just as mangled as his right hand, the bones pulverized into dust within the skin. He stumbled backward, his vision swimming, black spots dancing at the edges of his sight. He bit his lip so hard it bled, using the sharp tang of pain to anchor himself to consciousness. As the blizzard of shattered ice cleared, Izuku looked up, panting heavily. Todoroki was still standing, but barely. His breath was coming in ragged gasps. Half of his body was completely encased in frost. He was shivering violently, his teeth chattering. He looked incredibly small, incredibly vulnerable, trapped in the cage of his own making. "Todoroki!" Izuku roared, forcing himself to stand straight, forcing his trembling legs to hold firm. "Everyone is giving it their all. To win. To reach their dreams. To become number one. You think you can win with half your strength? Look at me." Izuku held up his destroyed, purple, broken hands. "I haven't even made a scratch on you yet. Come at me with everything you have." Silence fell over the stadium. The crowd was utterly captivated, frozen by the raw, visceral display of sheer willpower. This wasn't a sporting event anymore. It was an exorcism. Todoroki stared at the broken boy across from him. Midoriya was bruised, bleeding, his bones shattered, his uniform torn. And yet, his eyes were burning with a light brighter than the sun. He wasn't looking at Todoroki with pity, or fear, or hatred. He was looking at him with an unwavering, absolute belief. "Why?" Todoroki thought, the walls of his heart trembling. "Why are you going so far? It's yours! Your quirk, not his." The memory of his mother's voice, buried under years of ice and trauma, suddenly broke through the surface. "You aren't a prisoner of your bloodline, Shoto. It's okay for you to become who you want to be." Todoroki closed his eyes. The frost covering his right side began to melt. Water dripped from his chin. A soft, orange glow illuminated the space around him. Then, the world caught fire. A pillar of absolute, incandescent flame erupted from Shoto Todoroki's left side. The heat was instantaneous and staggering. The remaining ice in the arena vaporized in a fraction of a second, filling the stadium with a dense, blinding cloud of steam. The thermal updraft was so violent it tore the clouds from the sky above Yue, creating a vortex of swirling air and fire. The crowd shielded their faces, gasping as the sudden wave of heat washed over them. Shoto! Endeavor's roar echoed through the stadium, a booming, triumphant sound that shook the foundations of the arena. Have you finally accepted it? Yes. This is the dawn of your true power. With my blood, you will surpass me. You will fulfill my ambition. Todoroki ignored him. His dual-colored eyes, now reflecting the fierce, dancing light of his own flames, were locked solely on Izuku. The ice on his right side had vanished. The cold was gone. He looked completely unburdened, standing in the center of a raging inferno, wearing a small, genuine smile. You're crazy, Midoriya, Todoroki said softly, though the rushing wind carried his voice. To help your opponent, to push me this far, what kind of hero does that? Izuku, despite the agonizing, pulsating pain radiating from all four of his broken limbs, smiled back. He had done it. He had saved Shoto Todoroki. But gravity, and reality, suddenly reasserted themselves. Izuku's body swayed. The adrenaline, the only thing keeping him upright, was beginning to fail. His vision blurred again. He could feel the limits of his mortal frame screaming at him. He had one unbroken finger left. Just one. But Todoroki's next attack wasn't going to be a simple wave of ice. It was going to be a combination of absolute zero and blinding heat. An explosive thermal expansion that would level everything in its path. I have to hit him, Izuku realized, his tactical mind cutting through the haze of pain. I have to end this now, or I'll lose. I have to use one for all, on my whole body. Even if I break everything. Todoroki raised his right hand, chilling the air around him to sub-zero temperatures, while his left side burned hotter than ever. The air between them began to warp and distort from the extreme temperature difference. Thank you, Midoriya, Todoroki said, his voice echoing with finality. Todoroki unleashed the flash freeze heatwave. The supercooled air was violently heated, creating an explosive expansion of air pressure that rivaled a high-yield bomb. A shockwave of fire and wind roared toward Izuku, tearing up the ground, vaporizing the concrete, expanding so fast that it seemed to consume the very concept of space. In the commentator booth, Aizawa slammed his hand down on the buzzer. Cementos! Stop them! Prohero Cementos slammed his hands onto the ground, summoning massive, thick walls of reinforced concrete between the two boys, trying to absorb the impact of the impending collision. Izuku knew the walls wouldn't be enough. He could feel the immense, destructive power of Todoroki's attack closing in. It was a wave of pure annihilation. I can't just use my finger, Izuku thought, a terrifying calm washing over him. It won't be enough to punch through that. I have to use my whole arm. My broken, ruined right arm. Izuku drew his right arm back. The limbs screamed in protest, the broken bones grinding against each other. It was a suicidal move. To channel 100% of one for all through an already shattered limb wouldn't just break the bones again. It would turn the muscle tissue to paste. It would sever the nerves. He would lose the arm forever. He might even die from the shock. I know, Izuku thought, closing his eyes as the golden sparks of one for all began to dance along his ruined skin. I know I'll lose my arm. I know I might die. But a hero always risks his life to win. Smash! Izuku roared, preparing to throw the final punch of his life. And then, the universe stopped. The roaring flames froze in midair. The jagged slabs of concrete summoned by Cementos hung suspended in the atmosphere, perfectly still. The deafening sound of the crowd, the roaring wind, the crackling fire, all of it vanished, replaced by an oppressive, absolute silence. Izuku blinked. He was no longer standing in the UA arena. He was floating in an endless, starless void. The ground beneath him was non-existent, yet he felt supported by a strange, fluid tension in the air. The colors of the world had inverted, shifting into strange, nebulous hues of violet, deep emerald, and ethereal white. Where am I? Izuku whispered. His voice didn't echo. It was absorbed instantly by the void. He looked down at his hands. The purple bruises were gone. His fingers were straight. The pain that had been consuming his mind was completely erased, replaced by a strange, humming warmth that seemed to radiate from the very core of his being. You are inside the core, ninth. Izuku spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. Standing a few feet away from him was a man. He was tall, thin, with unkempt white hair that floated gently in the non-existent breeze, and piercing, sorrowful green eyes. He wore a ragged suit, and his body seemed to be made of semi-translucent light, flickering like a dying television screen. Behind the white-haired man, half hidden in the shadows of the void, were other figures. 6 of them. Some were tall, muscular silhouettes, others were shorter, leaner. None of their faces were clear, save for the white-haired man in the front. Who? Izuku stammered, stepping back. Who are you? The man offered a gentle, incredibly sad smile. I am the first. The one who began the stockpiling. The one who started the resistance against my brother. Izuku's breath hitched. The first user of One for All. The brother of All for One. The origin of the power he now carried. Why am I here? Izuku asked, panic beginning to bubble in his chest. The fight, Todoroki. I have to finish the match. I have to. You are going to die, Izuku Midoriya, the first said softly, cutting off Izuku's frantic words. The bluntness of the statement hit Izuku like a physical blow. What? Izuku breathed. The first gestured to the void around them. Suddenly, the starry expanse shifted, displaying a frozen, slow-motion projection of the real world. Izuku saw himself, his right arm pulled back, glowing with terrifying, violent energy, about to strike Todoroki's incoming fire blast. The power of One for All has been cultivated for over a century, the first explained, walking slowly around Izuku, his eyes locked on the glowing, frozen projection. It has been passed from user to user, growing stronger, denser, more volatile with each generation. 8 people before you have added their strength, their lives, their very souls to this fire. The first stopped and placed a translucent hand on Izuku's shoulder. It felt warm, heavy with the weight of generations. Tashinori Yagi, the 8th, was a miracle, the first continued. His body was uniquely suited to the quirk. He was a perfect vessel, empty of his own quirk, with a physique that could naturally handle the ocean of power. He added more to the stockpile than any user before him. He spent 40 years pouring his unyielding will and colossal strength into One for All. The first's eyes darkened. But because of that, the quirk has reached a breaking point. A singularity. It is no longer just an enhancement quirk. It is an amalgamation of immense, apocalyptic kinetic energy, bound together by the souls of its wielders. And you, 9th, you are just a boy. Your vessel was not prepared. I trained, Izuku argued weakly, looking down at his hands. I cleaned the beach. I built my body. All Might said, Tashinori is a fool, a new, gruff voice echoed from the shadows. One of the silhouettes, a bald man with goggles, stepped slightly forward, though his features remained obscured. A good man, the best of us, but a fool. He gave you a nuclear reactor and told you to plug it into a toaster. The first raised a hand, silencing the gruff voice. You have done remarkably well, Izuku, the first said gently. But physics and biology cannot be overcome by willpower alone. If you throw that punch, if you channel 100% of the current, singularity level 1 for all through your shattered arm, the recoil will not just break your bones, it will violently rupture your cellular structure. The kinetic feedback will shatter your spine, liquefy your organs, and instantly stop your heart. Izuku stared at the frozen image of himself. He saw the sheer, terrifying buildup of power in his arm. He saw the desperate, suicidal determination on his own face. He was going to die. A cold dread washed over him, but it wasn't fear of death. It was the crushing realization of failure. I won't become a hero, Izuku whispered, tears welling in his eyes. I'll die here? I won't save anyone? I leave All Might without a successor? No, the first said, his voice suddenly ringing with an intense, thrumming resonance that vibrated in Izuku's teeth. We will not let our vessel break. We will not let you die here, Izuku Midoriya. Your heart, your reckless, self-sacrificing, beautiful heart, has awakened us completely. You threw away your own dream, your own body, just to save the soul of a boy you barely know. You are the truest hero among us. The void began to shift. The violet and emerald colors swirled violently, coalescing into a raging storm of energy. The silhouettes in the background stepped forward, their glowing eyes fixed on Izuku. One for all has reached the singularity, the first declared, spreading his arms. It can no longer be contained within a fragile, mortal frame. The power is leaking, breaking the cup that holds it. Therefore, we must rebuild the cup. Rebuild? Izuku asked, stepping back as the storm of energy closed in around him. What are you talking about? We are going to force an evolution, the first said. The sadness was gone from his face, replaced by a grim, terrifying resolve. The quirk factors embedded within One for All will rewrite your DNA. We will alter your bone density, crystallize your muscle fibers, and reinforce your nervous system. We will merge the quirk with your very biology, permanently. Wait! Izuku yelled, the sheer scale of what they were proposing terrifying him. Can you even do that? What will happen to me? You will survive, the gruff voice from the shadows said. But it's going to hurt, kid. Worse than anything you've ever felt. And there is a price. The first drifted closer to Izuku, his glowing green eyes locking onto the boy's terrified face. Once we fuse the stockpile with your cellular structure, you will no longer be able to turn One for All off. You will not be able to throttle it down to 5% or 10%. You will exist, permanently, at 100% of the singularity output. You will become a living god among men. Your life will become a tightrope walk over a canyon of cardboard. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. Permanent 100%. To never be able to hold his mother without risking crushing her ribs. To shatter the ground with every step if he lost focus. To live with the constant, crushing burden of absolute, destructive power humming beneath his skin, forever. Do you accept this burden, Ninth? The first asked, his voice echoing from every direction at once. Will you carry the weight of our power, to save the boy in front of you, and the world beyond? Izuku looked back at the frozen image of the real world. He looked at Shoto Todoroki, wrapped in fire and ice, finally free of his mental chains. He thought of Uraraka, of Ada, of his mother. He thought of All Might, who had given up everything to smile for the world. He didn't hesitate. Do it, Izuku commanded, his voice steady, his emerald eyes burning with the fire of the Ninth. Save him. Save me. I'll carry whatever I have to, the first smiled. It was a radiant, blinding thing. Then be reborn, Izuku Midoriya. And forgive us for the hell we are about to put you through. The first reached out and plunged his glowing hand directly into Izuku's chest. Agony. Absolute, unadulterated, reality-shattering agony. Izuku's mouth opened in a silent, endless scream as the void exploded into a blinding supernova of green light. It felt as though millions of white-hot needles were being injected into every single cell of his body simultaneously. He could feel his DNA being unzipped, torn apart, and violently stitched back together with threads of pure, kinetic energy. His bones, brittle and broken, began to calcify. They thickened, turning from calcium phosphate into a bizarre, hyperdense, crystalline structure capable of withstanding the impact of a falling meteor. His muscle fibers snapped and rewove themselves, braiding tightly into high-tensile cords of meat and power that pulsed with a radioactive green hue. His nervous system was rewired. The pain receptors overloaded and burned out, replaced by pathways that carried pure electricity. His blood boiled, turning a vibrant, glowing red as it absorbed the immense oxygen and energy demands of his new biology. It was the feeling of being crushed at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, while simultaneously burning in the core of the sun. He was being reforged, hammered into shape upon the anvil of the vestige's will. Hold on! A chorus of voices roared in his mind. Hold on, Ninth! Izuku held on. He gripped his own consciousness with bloody, metaphorical fingernails, refusing to let the pain drag him into the abyss. He focused on the image of All Might's smile. He focused on the promise he had made, and then, just as suddenly as the eternity of pain had begun, the void shattered like a mirror. Time resumed. The roaring of the crowd, the crackling of Todoroki's flames, the rushing wind of the flash freeze heatwave. It all rushed back into Izuku's senses with overwhelming, deafening volume. But something was profoundly different. The heatwave of Todoroki's ultimate attack, a blast of thermal expansion capable of melting steel and pulverizing concrete, slammed into Izuku. It felt like a warm breeze. Izuku didn't throw the catastrophic, suicidal punch he had prepared. He didn't need to. He stood perfectly still, his right arm lowering to his side. The purple, necrotic bruising on his limbs was gone. His shattered fingers were perfectly straight, the bones healed and reinforced. As the apocalyptic wall of fire and wind descended upon him, Izuku simply raised his left hand, extending his index finger and thumb. He didn't scream. He didn't struggle. He simply looked at the incoming destruction with eyes that glowed with a terrifying, luminescent emerald light. Flick. Izuku brought his thumb and finger together, and snapped them. The sound was not an explosion. It was the sound of the sky tearing open. Physics simply broke. The kinetic force generated by Izuku's casual, singular flick did not just create a shockwave. It created a localized atmospheric displacement of cataclysmic proportions. The air in front of Izuku condensed into a solid wall of pressure, moving at Mach 10. It collided with Todoroki's flash freeze heatwave. The flames didn't just extinguish, they were erased from existence, snuffed out by a vacuum of displaced oxygen. The shockwave continued outward, a visible, rippling distortion in the air. It hit the massive, reinforced concrete walls Cementos had erected. The walls, feet thick and designed to withstand artillery fire, didn't shatter. They turned instantly to fine, gray dust, atomized by the sheer, ungodly force of the impact. "Get down!" Aizawa screamed into the microphone, his voice cracking with genuine terror as he threw himself over President Mike. In the stands, the shockwave hit the energy barriers designed to protect the audience. The barriers flashed a violent, blinding blue, screaming in protest before shattering like cheap glass. The wind hit the crowd. Pro-heroes, reacting on sheer instinct, threw themselves in front of civilians. Death Arms braced himself, screaming as he was pushed back several feet by the wind. Mount Lady grew to giant size, using her massive body to shield a section of the bleachers, groaning as the concussive force bruised her ribs. Endeavor, standing in his private box, had his blazing beard blown entirely out, his massive frame forced back a step by the impossible wind. His eyes widened to the size of saucers, a cold sweat breaking out over his skin. What is that power? Endeavor thought, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just witnessed. That wasn't a quirk. That was a natural disaster. Down in the arena, Todoroki Shoto didn't even have time to register the failure of his attack. The wall of wind hit him. He was lifted off his feet, completely weightless, and launched backward with the speed of a fired bullet. He skipped across the ruined concrete like a stone across a pond, before slamming violently into the outer boundary wall of the stadium. The reinforced steel buckled inward, creating a spiderweb crater 10 feet wide. Todoroki slumped forward, unconscious before he even hit the ground, his body battered but miraculously not broken, saved only by the fact that Izuku had deliberately aimed the flick slightly upward. Silence. A profound, terrifying silence descended upon the UA Sports Festival. The dust and steam slowly, agonizingly began to clear. The entire left side of the stadium was gone. The concrete ring was reduced to a smooth, polished bowl of pulverized rock. The walls were gone. The barriers were gone. Half of the spectator stands were missing their roofing, torn away by the updraft. Midnight, the R-rated hero, slowly peeked out from behind a ruined slab of concrete near the referee's stand. Her dominatrix whip hung limp in her hand. Her face was pale, devoid of its usual playful smirk. She looked toward the boundary wall, confirming Todoroki was out of bounds and unconscious. Then, slowly, terrified, she looked toward the center of the arena. The entire stadium followed her gaze. Millions of people watching around the world on live television held their breath. Standing in the epicenter of the destruction, completely untouched, was Izuku Midoriya. But he was not the same boy who had entered the ring. His Yui uniform jacket had been disintegrated by the force of his own attack, leaving him in his torn, sleeveless undershirt. His musculature had changed. It wasn't overly bulky, but it was dense, cut from marble, thrumming with visible tension. But the most terrifying aspect was the aura. Izuku was entirely wreathed in blinding, violently arcing green lightning. It wasn't the intermittent, subtle sparks of his 5% full cowl. This was a continuous, roaring cascade of energy. The lightning, thick as ropes, crackling and snapping off his skin, striking the pulverized ground around him and leaving scorched black craters. His hair floated wildly, defying gravity, glowing with an ethereal green luminescence. His eyes, usually large and innocent, were now narrowed, glowing completely solid green, devoid of pupils or irises. He looked like a god that had just descended onto a battlefield of mortals. Up in the stands, Toshinori Yagi forgot to breathe. He gripped the railing so hard the metal groaned and twisted under his fingers. Young Midoriya. All Might thought, his heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against his ribs. That aura, that pressure. It's exactly like mine. No, it's denser. It's wilder. You forced it all the way open. 100%. But why aren't you broken? How are you standing? In the center of the arena, Izuku stood paralyzed. He wasn't trying to look intimidating. He was trapped in a state of absolute, overwhelming sensory overload. The world was entirely, horrifically loud. He could hear Todoroki's heartbeat across the arena, a slow, steady thump-thump against the ruined wall. He could hear Midnight's rapid, terrified breathing. He could hear the grinding of Endeavor's teeth up in the VIP box. He could hear the hum of the television cameras, the electricity running through the stadium wires, the microscopic shifting of tectonic plates deep beneath the earth. He could see the individual dust motes floating in the air, tracking their descent with mathematical precision. He could smell the ozone in the air from his own lightning, the sweat of the terrified crowd, the copper tang of Todoroki's blood. Too much, Izuku thought, his hands flying to his head, gripping his hair. It's too much. Turn it off. Turn it off. He mentally reached for the switch in his mind, the valve he used to turn one for all down to zero. He found it, and he slammed it shut. Nothing happened. The green lightning roared louder, flaring violently. The ground beneath his feet spiderwebbed, cracking under the sheer, passive pressure of his existence. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the sensory haze. He couldn't turn it off. The first user's words echoed in his mind, a grim prophecy now realized. You will exist, permanently, at 100%. Your life will become a tightrope walk over a canyon of cardboard. Turn it off, Izuku gasped aloud, his voice vibrating with strange, overlapping harmonics, like multiple voices speaking at once. He dropped to his knees. The moment his kneecaps touched the pulverized concrete, the ground violently exploded, cratering another 3 feet deep purely from the weight of his unyielding, reinforced body. Todoroki is out of bounds. Midnight's voice finally rang out over the loudspeakers, trembling, lacking any of its usual theatrical flair. Midoriya. Midoriya advances to the third round. There was no cheering. Normally, the crowd would erupt into a frenzy of applause at such a spectacular finish. But nobody moved. Nobody clapped. The tens of thousands of people in the stadium stared at the glowing, crackling boy in the center of the ruins in absolute, stunned terror. They weren't looking at a high school student anymore. They were looking at a weapon of mass destruction that had just proved it could level a city block with a flick of its finger. In the Class 1A seating area, Katsuki Bakugo stood frozen, his crimson eyes wide, his jaw slack. The explosive boy, who had spent his entire life looking down on the quirkless Deku, felt a cold, primal shiver run down his spine. The power he had just witnessed, it dwarfed him. It dwarfed All Might. It made his explosions look like firecrackers thrown against a hurricane. Deku. Bakugo whispered, the nickname lacking its usual venom, replaced by hollow disbelief. What the hell are you? Beside him, Achiko Uraraka covered her mouth with trembling hands, tears welling in her eyes, though she couldn't explain why. She didn't feel triumph for her friend. She felt a deep, profound sorrow, looking at how isolated he seemed in the center of that crater, surrounded by his own violent light. Down in the crater, Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the overwhelming flood of sensory information. My body didn't break, he thought, tears leaking from his tightly shut eyes, instantly vaporizing into steam against the heat of his aura. I survived. I saved Todoroki. He slowly lowered his hands, looking at his palms. They were glowing, vibrating with infinite, destructive power. He flexed his fingers, and the air cracked like a whip. But I'm stuck, Izuku realized, the horrific reality of his new existence finally settling over him like a suffocating blanket. If I high-five Uraraka right now, I'll tear her arm off. If I hug my mom, I'll crush her spine. If I take a single careless step, I'll destroy the school. The burden of absolute power pressed down on his 15-year-old shoulders. The adrenaline finally, mercifully, left his system. The sheer mental exhaustion of processing a million sights and sounds a second took its toll. Izuku's glowing green eyes rolled back into his head. He collapsed forward. When his forehead hit the ground, the concrete didn't catch him. His head smashed through the bedrock like a cannonball, embedding his upper body into the earth with a violent crack. He lay there, unconscious in the center of the annihilated stadium, but the green lightning did not fade. The aura did not recede. The power continued to roar, an eternal, crackling fire that painted the ruins of the arena in a ghostly, radioactive light. Up in the stands, Toshinori Yagi stood up, his face pale, ignoring the frantic calls of the heroes around him. He stared at the glowing, unconscious form of his successor, the symbol of peace, realized, with a deep, sickening dread, that the age of heroes had just ended. The age of gods had begun. Consciousness did not return to Izuku Midoriya softly. It did not creep in like the gentle morning tide. It crashed into him like a derailed freight train of pure, unfiltered sensory data. Before he even opened his eyes, the universe began screaming at him. First came the sounds. He heard a rhythmic, wet, thumping noise, incredibly loud, like a bass drum being beaten in a cavern. Thump thump. Thump thump. It took his overwhelmed, racing mind a fraction of a second to realize he was hearing a heartbeat. But it wasn't his own. The rhythm was too slow, too labored. Then, beneath that, a chorus of 1,000 other sounds. The high-pitched, agonizing whine of fluorescent lights overhead, sounding like a dentist's drill against his eardrums. The microscopic skitter-skitter of a spider crawling inside the air ventilation ducts 3 rooms away. The rustling of fabric that sounded like sandpaper tearing. The hum of the earth itself, a low, subsonic vibration that rattled in his newly fortified teeth. Then came the tactile sensations. The sheets covering him did not feel like cotton. They felt like a heavy chainmail net made of coarse, burning burlap. The air resting against his skin felt thick, viscous, like he was submerged in warm syrup. He could feel individual air molecules colliding with his epidermis. What is happening? Izuku thought. His internal voice didn't echo normally in his head. It fired with the speed of a supercomputer, processing the panic before the emotion could even fully register. He tried to open his eyes. The light of Recovery Girl's infirmary hit his retinas like a flashbang grenade. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, a sharp gasp tearing from his throat. "He's awake!" a voice barked. It was coarse, terrified, and painfully loud. It was Gran Torino, though Izuku hadn't realized the old hero was even in the room. "Midoriya? Young Midoriya, can you hear me?" That was All Might. The Eighth. The voice of his mentor, though it trembled with an undercurrent of fear Izuku had never heard before. Izuku forced his eyes open again, squinting through the blinding glare. He didn't just see the room, he saw the details. He saw the microscopic dust motes dancing in the air currents. He saw the individual threads weaving the fabric of All Might's oversized yellow suit. He saw the sweat beading on Recovery Girl's forehead, the dilation of her pupils, the erratic pulsing of the vein in her neck. I'm awake," Izuku tried to say, but what came out of his mouth was not his normal, slightly timid voice. It was a resonant, booming chord that vibrated the very air in the room. It possessed a strange, overlapping harmonic, as if several voices were speaking the exact same words in perfect unison beneath his own. The glass speakers on Recovery Girl's medical tray violently rattled against one another at the sound. All Might took a distinct, involuntary step back. Izuku's heart sank. He stepped back. "All Might is afraid of me. What's wrong with my voice?" Izuku whispered, consciously trying to whisper, to pull the volume down. Even still, the sound carried the heavy, oppressive weight of thunder rolling over distant hills. "Stay perfectly still, son," Recovery Girl commanded, her voice remarkably steady despite the terror radiating from her scent. Izuku could smell it, the sharp, acrid tang of cortisol and adrenaline. "Do not move a muscle. Do you understand me?" Blink once for yes. Izuku blinked. Why shouldn't I move? He needed to sit up. He felt incredibly stiff, his body humming with a terrifying, restless energy that made his skin feel like it was vibrating. He could see a faint, emerald green aura constantly licking across his arms, tiny arcs of lightning snapping against the white sheets. Forgetting her instruction in his disorientation, Izuku shifted his weight to push himself up. He reached his hands down to the sides of the standard UA medical bed, grabbing the thick, stainless steel guardrails to leverage his torso upward. He didn't squeeze hard. He applied the exact amount of pressure a normal 15-year-old boy would use to sit up in bed. Skree crunch. The sound of rending metal violently pierced the air. Izuku froze. He looked down at his hands. The thick, solid steel bars of the bed frame, designed to hold the weight of heavy, mutation quirk students, had not just bent. They had crumpled, compressed, and folded under his fingers like wet, single-ply toilet paper. Where his fingertips rested, the steel had literally thinned into sharp, metallic ribbons, pulverized by the sheer, absolute density of his passive grip. He hadn't felt any resistance. To his hands, the steel had offered the exact same physical pushback as a cloud of smoke. Izuku stammered, staring at his glowing hands in absolute horror. I didn't squeeze it. Good Lord, All Might breathed, his sunken eyes wide, his skeletal hands trembling. Midoriya, recovery girl said, her voice sharp, cutting through the panic. Release the metal. Slowly. Do not pull your hands up, or you will rip the frame out of the floor. Just open your fingers. Izuku swallowed hard. His heart hammered in his chest, pumping heavy, oxygen-rich blood through his newly crystallized veins. He focused entirely on his hands. He commanded his fingers to open. It took immense mental effort, terrifying concentration, just to execute the simplest motor function without applying kinetic force. He uncurled his fingers. The flattened, ruined steel fell away from his palms. What happened to me? Izuku asked, looking up at his mentor. Todoroki, the match, the vestiges. You spoke to them? All Might asked, leaning forward, the fear momentarily eclipsed by profound shock. The past users? During the match? Izuku nodded slowly, mindful of his neck movements. The first. He said the power had reached a singularity. He said my body was going to break from the recoil of my punch. To save me they forced an evolution. They fused one for all with my DNA. Silence fell over the infirmary, thick and suffocating. Gran Torino, standing near the door with his arms crossed, let out a long, heavy sigh. Chio, Torino said, looking at Recovery Girl. Show the kid the scans. Recovery Girl walked over to a light board mounted on the wall. Her hands were shaking as she clipped several large, dark X-ray and MRI films onto the glowing panel. When you collapsed in the arena, Recovery Girl began, her tone strictly clinical, a defense mechanism against the impossible reality of the situation. You did not fall into a coma from physical trauma. Your body underwent a spontaneous, violent metamorphosis. You were radiating so much ambient kinetic energy that the concrete beneath you was continuously turning to dust. We had to have Cementos and Aizawa carry you here on a floating slab of bedrock, and even then, Aizawa keeping his eyes on you barely dimmed your output. She pointed to the first X-ray. It was an image of a human skeleton, but it was entirely wrong. Normal bones on an X-ray appeared as semi-translucent white shapes. The bones in this image were completely, solid, opaque white, utterly impervious to the radiation of the machine. Furthermore, they weren't smooth. The bones were laced with intricate, fractal-like crystalline patterns, thickening at the joints and wrapping around the spine like an armored carapace. This is your skeletal structure as of 3 hours ago, she said. Your bones are no longer made of standard calcium phosphate. They have calcified and crystallized into a hyperdense, unknown compound. We tried to draw blood to test it. She reached into her pocket and placed a medical syringe on the table. The titanium needle was bent completely backward, flattened at the tip. The needle couldn't pierce your epidermis, she said grimly. Your skin has the tensile strength of woven carbon nanotubes. But the MRI was the most terrifying part. She flicked a switch, illuminating a color-coded scan of Izuku's musculature. Instead of red and pink tissue, The image showed intense, burning hotspots of green and gold. Your muscle fibers are in a state of perpetual, maximized contraction and energy output, she explained. Every single cell in your body is acting like an independent microscopic nuclear reactor, generating and storing infinite kinetic energy. Midoriya, your body has adapted to handle 100% of one for all. Izuku stared at the scans. So, I'm healed? I can use it without breaking? You're not listening, kid, Gran Torino snapped, though his eyes held deep pity. You aren't handling it. You're stuck in it. You're constantly, passively emitting the full, unadulterated power of the stockpile. You can't turn it off. Izuku felt a cold spike of terror pierce his heart. The first user's warning. You will exist, permanently, at 100% of the singularity output. I can control it, Izuku said, panic rising in his chest. I just need to focus. Like the egg in the microwave. I can dial it down. He closed his eyes. He imagined the microwave. He imagined the glowing, roaring fire of one for all inside his chest. Usually, he could visualize closing a valve, restricting the flow to 5%. He reached for that valve in his mind. He found it, but it was shattered. The dam had burst. There was no valve, no throttle, no control mechanism. The power was no longer a separate entity he channeled. It was him. It was his blood, his breath, his bones. Asking him to turn off one for all was like asking a normal human to turn off their skeletal system. I can't, Izuku whispered, opening his eyes, the emerald lightning flaring violently around his head. I can't turn it off. It's just on. All Might stepped forward, placing a hand over his own face, rubbing his sunken eyes. He looked older than he ever had, hollowed out by an immense, crushing guilt. Young Midoriya, All Might said, his voice cracking. Do you know what this means? It means I'm strong, Izuku tried to rationalize, grasping at straws. It means I can protect people. I can be the symbol of peace right now. No! All Might shouted, slamming his fist against the wall. The sudden outburst made Izuku flinch, and the resulting muscle twitch in Izuku's leg caused the entire medical bed to collapse inward, the steel buckling under the infinitesimal shift in his weight. Izuku dropped a foot to the floor, and the linoleum tiles exploded outward like a claymore mine, the concrete subfloor spiderwebbing beneath his foot. Don't move! All Might commanded, holding his hands out, his eyes wide with terror. Izuku froze, balancing awkwardly on one foot, terrified to place his other foot on the ground. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, vaporizing into steam before they could fall down his cheeks. I'm sorry, Izuku sobbed, the booming, layered harmonic of his voice vibrating the glass of the windows. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It's not your fault, my boy, All Might said, his anger vanishing, replaced by a profound, agonizing sorrow. He looked at Izuku, seeing a 15-year-old child trapped inside the body of a god. But you must understand your reality now. You are no longer living in the same world as the rest of us. All Might walked slowly toward the bed, maintaining a careful distance. When I was in my prime, All Might explained softly, I lived with a constant, terrible fear. The fear of my own strength. You see, the world is incredibly fragile, Izuku. It was the first time All Might had used his given name. Imagine, All Might continued, gesturing around the room, that you are suddenly transported to a world made entirely of cardboard. The houses, the streets, the cars, the people, all of them, constructed of wet, fragile, single-ply tissue paper. Every step you take could collapse a street. Every time you open a door, you risk tearing it off its hinges. If you pat a friend on the back, you will snap their spine in two. If you sneeze, you will level a city block. Izuku stared at his glowing, crackling hands. The metaphor was terrifyingly accurate. He remembered the feel of the steel bed frame. It hadn't felt like steel. It had felt like nothing. You are at 100%, permanently, All Might said, a single tear rolling down his gaunt cheek. You cannot turn your power down. Therefore, you can never, ever let your guard down. You can never lose your temper. You can never act on instinct. You must constantly, agonizingly restrain every microscopic movement of your body, or you will destroy everything and everyone you touch. Izuku couldn't breathe. The weight of the realization crushed down on his chest. I can't hug my mom, Izuku thought, the realization striking him like a physical blow. If I hug her, I'll kill her. If I shake Ida's hand, I'll rip his arm off. I can never spar with Uraraka again. I can never bump shoulders with Todoroki. He was utterly, completely alone. He had attained the absolute pinnacle of power, and it had instantly isolated him from humanity. What do we do? Izuku asked, his voice breaking. First, Gran Torino said, stepping away from the door. We get you out of this infirmary before you sneeze and vaporize the medical wing. Misa has been preparing a specialized containment vault beneath ground beta since you brought the house down at the festival. You're going into isolation, kid. Until you can learn to control your body, you are a walking natural disaster. The transfer to the underground vault was a nightmare of agonizing concentration. Aizawa was called in. Standing 10 feet away, Eraserhead activated his quirk, his eyes glowing red, his capture scarf floating. He stared intensely at Izuku, trying to erase the quirk. For a brief, fleeting millisecond, the green lightning dimmed. The oppressive pressure in the room lifted. Izuku felt a sudden, glorious wave of normalcy wash over his muscles, but it didn't last. Aizawa gasped, violently blinking, blood suddenly dripping from his right eye. He stumbled back, clutching his face. Aizawa-sensei! Izuku cried out, stepping forward. Stop! Aizawa barked, holding up a hand. I'm fine. It physically hurts to look at you. It's like trying to put out a forest fire with a cup of water. My quirk can't erase a permanent genetic mutation of this magnitude. It's too deep. It's too dense. With Aizawa's quirk ineffective, Izuku had to walk on his own. It was the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. Every step required a conscious, mathematical calculation. He had to lift his leg using the absolute minimum amount of muscle contraction required to defy gravity, move it forward at a glacial pace, and set it down without transferring his kinetic weight into the floor. It took them 45 minutes to walk from the infirmary to the elevator. Izuku was sweating profusely, his mind exhausted from the sheer psychological strain of throttling his own body. Even with his extreme caution, he left a trail of microfractures in the concrete floor with every step. When they finally reached the subterranean vault beneath ground beta, the thick, titanium alloy blast doors sealed shut behind him, plunging him into a sterile, heavily reinforced white room. Nisa's voice crackled through an intercom in the ceiling. Welcome, Midoriya. This room is lined with 3 feet of high-density shock-absorbing polymers, backed by 2 feet of reinforced titanium. It is designed to withstand a direct hit from a tactical nuclear warhead. You are relatively safe to move here. Izuku stood in the center of the vast, empty room. He looked at All Might and Gran Torino, who were standing behind an incredibly thick pane of bulletproof glass in the observation deck above. What am I supposed to do now? Izuku called up, his voice vibrating the titanium walls. You learn to exist. Torino's voice came back through the speaker. Look at the table in the corner. Izuku turned. In the corner of the room, sitting on a reinforced steel block, was a delicate porcelain teacup, filled to the brim with water. Your first task, kid, Torino instructed, is to walk across the room, pick up that teacup, and take a sip, without spilling a drop or breaking the cup. If you can do that, we'll talk about letting you see your mother. Izuku swallowed. It sounded absurdly simple. He took a breath, calming his racing heart. He began the agonizing, slow-motion walk across the room. He reached the table. The porcelain cup looked incredibly small, incredibly fragile beneath the crackling green arcs of his aura. He reached out with his right hand. He focused every ounce of his willpower, every scrap of his mental fortitude, on moving his fingers as slowly and gently as humanly possible. His thumb and index finger made contact with the porcelain handle. Gentle. Gentle, he chanted in his mind. He attempted to lift the cup. The moment he applied upward kinetic force, the porcelain detonated. It didn't just break, it exploded into fine, powdery dust, the water vaporizing instantly from the sudden shockwave of his fingers pinching together. The steel block beneath the cup crumpled slightly from the displaced air pressure. Izuku stared at the empty space where the cup had been, dust settling on his glowing hands. Again, Torino's voice echoed mercilessly from the speaker. A panel in the wall opened, and a mechanical arm placed another teacup on the table. For 3 days, Izuku did not sleep. His new biology didn't seem to require it, burning limitless energy to keep him awake. For 3 days he stood in the vault, surrounded by mountains of pulverized porcelain dust, trying to pick up a single cup. He failed over, and over, and over again. He cried. He screamed in frustration, the sound waves of his anger cracking the reinforced glass of the observation deck, forcing All Might and the others to retreat to monitors. He punched the titanium wall in a moment of despair, leaving a massive, 10-foot-deep crater in the metal, shaking the entire UA campus above ground and registering as a 4.0 earthquake in the surrounding city. The mental toll was catastrophic. He was a prisoner, in his own flesh. The power of One for All, the quirk he had idolized, the power he had broken his body to master, had become a terrifying, suffocating cage. On the 4th day, he finally managed to pick up the cup. His hand shook violently, not from physical exertion, but from the immense mental pressure of holding back his strength. He brought the cup to his lips, took a sip, and set it down. The cup survived. Izuku collapsed to his knees, weeping silently, exhausted to his very soul. The blast doors opened. Izuku looked up. Standing in the doorway, escorted by All Might and Aizawa, was his mother, Inko Midoriya. She looked terrifyingly small. She was clutching her purse to her chest, her eyes red and puffy from days of crying. When she saw Izuku, glowing, crackling with lightning, sitting in a cratered, pulverized room of metal, she let out a heartbreaking sob. "Izuku!" she cried, dropping her purse and running toward him. "Stop!" Izuku's voice boomed with terrifying force. The sound wave hit Inko like a physical wall of wind, causing her to stumble backward, her hands flying to her ears. "Don't come closer, Mom!" Izuku screamed, scrambling backward on his hands and knees, terrified. Every movement he made cracked the titanium floor. "Stay away from me!" Inko froze, tears streaming down her face. "Izuku, my baby, what did they do to you? Let me hug you." "You can't!" Izuku choked out, wrapping his arms around himself, his emerald eyes wide with terror. "Mom, please! If you touch me, if I lose control for a second, I'll hurt you. I'll kill you. I'm a monster." Inko broke down, falling to her knees on the cold metal floor. She reached out her hand toward him, separated by 30 feet of empty, heavily reinforced space. "You're not a monster," she wept. "You're my son. You're my sweet boy." "I can't even hold you," Izuku whispered, the absolute tragedy of his existence finally breaking his spirit. "I saved him, Mom. I saved Todoroki. But I lost myself." All Might turned his face away, unable to watch the scene. He had given this boy his dream, and in doing so, he had cursed him to a life of eternal isolation. The power of the gods was never meant for the hands of mortals. While Izuku mourned his lost humanity in a titanium vault, the world above ground was burning. The UA Sports Festival had been broadcast live to millions of viewers. The sudden, cataclysmic conclusion to the match between Midoriya and Todoroki was impossible to hide. The footage of Izuku, wreathed in green lightning, atomizing the arena with a flick of his finger, had gone viral within minutes. It was the most analyzed piece of footage in modern human history. In a high-rise news studio in Tokyo, a prominent anchor sat behind a desk, looking grimly at the camera. Behind him, the footage of the flick looped continuously in slow motion. "Good evening. We begin tonight with the continuing fallout from the unprecedented events at the UA Sports Festival 4 days ago," the anchor said, his voice somber. Despite complete silence from UA High School and the Hero Public Safety Commission, anonymous leaks from within the medical wing have painted a terrifying picture. The screen shifted, showing a blurred, leaked medical report with the name Midoriya, Izuku barely visible at the top. According to sources, the 15-year-old student, Izuku Midoriya, did not simply demonstrate a powerful quirk. Experts analyzing the seismic data, wind pressure, and sheer destructive capability of the single attack have concluded something unprecedented. The anchor took a breath. The boy's output, at a mere fraction of his body's movement, vastly exceeds the recorded maximum output of the number one hero, All Might, in his prime. The screen cut to a panel of quirk analysts and pro-heroes. "It's a quirk singularity event," one expert, a bespectacled scientist said frantically. It's the doomsday theory realized. If this boy sneezes in a populated area, he could level a city block. If he throws a punch, he could alter the weather patterns. He shouldn't be in a school. He needs to be contained. He's a child. Another panelist argued. He's a hero course student. He's a walking weapon of mass destruction. The scientist shot back. The balance of power on the globe just shifted to a teenager in Muzutafu. Deep in an abandoned bar in Yokohama, a man covered in disembodied hands sat perfectly still, watching the broadcast on a static-filled television. Tamura Shigaraki reached up, his fingers digging into his neck, scratching violently until blood welled beneath his fingernails. No, Shigaraki hissed, his eyes wide, manic, and terrified. No, no, no. This is a cheat code. The game is broken. The final boss just spawned in the tutorial zone. Behind the bar, Kurojiri silently wiped a glass, his yellow eyes fixed on the television screen. A monitor mounted on the wall suddenly flickered to life. The audio frequency in the room dropped, replaced by the heavy, mechanical breathing of a man sustained by life support. Master, Shigaraki rasped, turning to the screen. You see this? The brat. He's stronger than All Might. The Nomu we're building, they're obsolete. We can't fight that. For a long time, the mechanical breathing was the only sound in the room. When All for One finally spoke, his voice was not angry. It was chillingly calm, laced with a dark, predatory fascination. My brother's power has finally reached the zenith, All for One murmured, almost reverently. The cup has overflowed. The boy is permanently locked at the singularity. He is no longer a human vessel, Tamura. He is the quarks themselves, made flesh. What do we do? Shigaraki demanded, panic bleeding into his voice. If he comes after us, we're dead. All of us. Patience, Tamura, All for One soothed, his voice dripping with malice. Absolute power is an absolute burden. The boy's mind is fragile. His society will fear him. His friends will abandon him. He will be isolated, terrified, and crushed beneath the weight of his own existence. The mechanical breathing hitched, a cruel chuckle escaping the mask. We do not need to fight him head-on. We simply need to show the world what happens when a god throws a tantrum. Accelerate the timeline, Tamura. The war begins now. We will break the boy's mind, and when he falls, the world will burn in his emerald fire. The alarm clock did not wake Izuku Midoriya. He had been awake for 72 hours straight. His new biology, continuously burning with the infinite kinetic energy of the singularity, simply did not require sleep. When he closed his eyes, his mind did not drift into the soft, comforting embrace of unconsciousness. Instead, it raced, processing the millions of microscopic sensory inputs his reinforced nervous system picked up from the surrounding world. He could hear the hum of the electrical grid beneath the city. He could feel the shifting of tectonic plates miles deep. He was a living god, trapped in the bedroom of an all-might Fanba. Izuku sat on the edge of his bed in the subterranean containment vault Niza had converted into a temporary dorm room. The walls were still 3 feet of high-density shock-absorbing polymer backed by titanium. The air was sterile, filtered through heavily reinforced vents. It was time to get dressed for school. For a normal teenager, this was a mundane task. For Izuku, it was a high-stakes surgical operation. He looked at his UA uniform laid out on the steel table across the room. He took a slow, deep breath, calculating the exact amount of oxygen his lungs needed without accidentally creating a vacuum in the room. He stood up. He engaged his leg muscles to precisely 1/1,000,000th of their capacity. He walked forward. Step. Heel to toe. Absorb the weight. Do not push off. He reached the table. He picked up his white dress shirt. The cotton fabric felt absurdly frail, like cobwebs spun from morning dew. He slid his arm into the sleeve. He had to keep his muscles completely relaxed. A sudden flinch, a momentary lapse in concentration, and his bicep would tear the sleeve to shreds. He brought his hands together to button the shirt. The plastic buttons were the hardest part. They were so small, so brittle. He manipulated his index finger and thumb, his eyes glowing with a faint, continuous emerald light, tiny arcs of static electricity jumping between his knuckles. Crack, The plastic button shattered into dust between his fingers. Izuku stopped. He closed his eyes, an overwhelming wave of exhaustion washing over him. It wasn't physical fatigue. It was the agonizing, unending mental strain of throttling his own existence. He let out a slow, trembling breath, the air whistling through his teeth with a faint, harmonic resonance. "It's okay," he whispered to the empty, armored room. "Just skip that button. Use the next one." By the time he was fully dressed, 30 minutes had passed. He looked in the mirror bolted to the wall. He looked like Izuku Midoriya, but the illusion shattered upon closer inspection. His green eyes were too bright, devoid of pupils, glowing with an inner, radioactive fire. The air around him shimmered slightly, distorted by the immense body heat and latent kinetic energy he was radiating. A heavy, metallic buzz sounded from the intercom. "Midoriya," Aizawa's exhausted voice crackled through the speaker. "The transport is here. Come up to the surface." Slowly, Izuku grabbed his yellow backpack. He didn't sling it over his shoulder. He held it gingerly by the top strap, terrified that if he pulled too hard, he would rip the bag in half. The walk through the reinforced corridors of the underground facility was silent. When he reached the surface level and stepped out into the crisp morning air of the UA campus, he was immediately greeted by an absurd sight. Waiting for him was not a school bus, nor was he allowed to walk to class. It was a heavily armored tactical transport vehicle, the kind usually reserved for transporting S-rank villains to Tartarus. The armor plating was a foot thick. Standing around the vehicle were 4 pro-heroes: Cementas, Snipe, Midnight, and Aizawa. They weren't there to protect Izuku from villains. They were there to protect the public from Izuku. "Morning, problem child," Aizawa said, his eyes heavily bagged. He kept a deliberate distance of at least 10 feet. "Get in. The suspension has been reinforced to handle your passive density, but sit gently." "Good morning, Aizawa-sensei." "Cementas." "Midnight." "Snipe," Izuku replied, his booming, resonant voice making the heroes subconsciously tense up. He climbed into the back of the armored truck, taking a seat on the reinforced steel bench. The doors clamped shut with a heavy, magnetic seal. The truck began to move. Izuku sat in the dark, windowless cabin, staring at his glowing hands. He missed the train. He missed the morning rush hour, the chatter of commuters, the smell of coffee, the feeling of being just another face in the crowd. Now, he was a payload, a living, breathing nuclear warhead being escorted to a high school classroom. When the truck arrived at the main academic building, the halls were completely empty. Nisa had altered the bell schedule, forcing all other classes to remain in their homerooms until Izuku was seated in Class 1A. They didn't want him walking through crowded hallways. The risk of an accidental bump, a careless jostle from an upperclassman, was deemed catastrophically high. Accompanied by Aizawa, Izuku walked down the silent, spotless corridors. Thump. 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 Even with all his concentration, Izuku's footsteps echoed with a heavy, unnatural density. The floorboards groaned beneath his feet. They reached the colossal door of Class 1A. Aizawa stopped. He looked at Izuku, his dark eyes filled with a complicated mixture of pity, sorrow, and professional wariness. "Midoriya," Aizawa said softly. "The dynamic in there, it's not going to be the same. The sports festival broadcast showed the entire world what you are now. Your classmates are teenagers. They are going to be afraid. Do not take it personally, and whatever you do, do not react emotionally. Your emotions are tied to your output." Izuku swallowed the lump in his throat. "I understand, sensei." Aizawa reached out and slid the massive door open. Izuku stepped into the classroom. Usually, Class 1A was a cacophony of noise. Ida would be chopping his arms, yelling about posture. Mina and Kaminari would be laughing at some joke. Bakugo would be screaming at someone to die. Today, the silence was absolute. 20 pairs of eyes instantly snapped to the doorway. The moment Izuku crossed the threshold, the physics of the room fundamentally altered. The ambient air pressure spiked, making ears pop. The hairs on the arms of every student stood straight up, reacting to the massive surge of static electricity bleeding off Izuku's skin. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing frantically as Izuku's bioelectric field interfered with the wiring. Izuku stood frozen in the doorway. He looked at his friends. Minato was trembling so hard his teeth were visibly chattering, pressing himself flat against the back wall of the classroom. Kaminari looked pale, his own electrical quirk instinctively short-circuiting in the presence of a vastly superior power source. Momo Yaoyorozu had her hands clasped tightly on her desk, her knuckles white. In the back of the room, Shoto Todoroki sat perfectly still. The bandages from their match were still wrapped around his arms and face. Todoroki met Izuku's glowing green eyes. There was no fear in Todoroki's gaze, but there was a deep, unbridgeable gulf of realization. Todoroki nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the god that had saved him. But he did not speak. And then, there was Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo was sitting at his desk, his head angled slightly downward, his spiky ash-blonde hair shadowing his eyes. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't producing small explosions from his palms. His hands were resting on his desk, and they were shaking. It was a subtle tremor, but Izuku's enhanced vision caught it immediately. Bakugo wasn't angry. He was suffering a complete, devastating psychological collapse. The boy who had built his entire identity on the absolute certainty of his own superiority was sitting in a room with a being that could atomize him with a flick of a finger. "Take your seat, Midoriya," Aizawa commanded, breaking the suffocating silence. Izuku nodded mechanically. He walked down the aisle. As he passed their desks, his classmates subconsciously leaned away from him. It wasn't malicious. It was the purest, most primal biological instinct, predator and prey. "Run." Izuku reached his desk. It wasn't his old desk. Mizu had replaced it overnight with a custom-built workstation made of darkened tungsten alloy, bolted directly into the concrete foundation of the building. His chair was equally reinforced. Izuku sat down slowly. The tungsten creaked slightly under his weight but held. "All right," Aizawa said, stepping to the podium, though his eyes never left Izuku. "Homeroom begins now. We have a lot to cover regarding your hero internships following the festival." Aizawa's voice became a dull drone in Izuku's ears. He stared at his custom-built desk. He looked at the reinforced, titanium-cased pencil resting in the groove. He felt a profound, crushing sense of isolation wash over him, cold and suffocating. "They're terrified of me," Izuku thought, his heart aching with a hollow, rhythmic thud. "I'm right here. I'm the same person. I still like All Might. I still want to be a hero. But they look at me like I'm an Oma." When the lunch bell rang, the tension in the room snapped like a stretched rubber band. Students quietly packed their bags and filed out of the room, keeping a wide berth around Izuku's desk. No one asked him to join them in the cafeteria. Soon, the classroom was empty, save for Izuku, Aizawa, and two others who had lingered near the door, Achiko Uraraka and Tenya Ida. Izuku looked up. Achiko was clutching her backpack straps tightly, her face pale, but her brown eyes were filled with a fierce, stubborn determination. Ida stood beside her, stiff, adjusting his glasses, looking at Izuku like he was a complex mathematical equation that could explode at any moment. "Aizawa-sensei," Achiko said, her voice trembling slightly. Can we talk to him?" Aizawa sighed, rubbing his eyes. "You can. But maintain a distance of 5 feet. Do not touch him. If you touch him and he loses focus, he will shatter your bones. Do you understand?" Achiko flinched, but she nodded. She and Ida slowly approached Izuku's tungsten desk. "Deku." "Izuku," Achiko started, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It's good to see you back. We were really worried. The medical wing wouldn't let anyone in." "I'm sorry, Uraraka," Izuku said softly. The harmonic, booming quality of his voice vibrated the glass in the windows. Achiko winced visibly, taking a half-step back before catching herself. Izuku saw the wince. It felt like a knife twisting in his gut. "Midoriya," Ida interjected, his voice overly formal, a defense mechanism. "Your performance at the festival was unprecedented. The sheer magnitude of your quirk's awakening is a marvel. However, as the class representative, I must ask, are you physically stable?" Izuku looked at Ida. He could hear Ida's heart rate. It was at 130 beats per minute. Ida was terrified. "I'm stable," Izuku lied. His body was stable. His mind was hanging by a thread. I have a lot of power now. And I can't turn it off. I have to be very careful. We want to help, Achiko said, taking another step forward, crossing the 5-foot threshold Aizawa had established. The ambient kinetic energy rolling off Izuku hit her. Her short brown hair defied gravity, floating wildly around her head due to the intense static field. She felt a heavy, oppressive pressure on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. Uraraka, stop, Izuku warned, panic flaring in his glowing eyes. He pushed his chair back violently. The tungsten legs screeched against the floor, gouging deep trenches into the linoleum. Achiko froze. Please, Izuku begged, pressing himself against the back wall, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Please don't come any closer. If I sneeze, if I cough, if I twitch, the air pressure will snap your neck. You can't be near me. It's not safe. Deku, we're your friends, Achiko pleaded, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. We aren't going to abandon you just because you're strong. I'm not strong, Izuku yelled. The shout was a mistake. The sound wave erupted from his mouth like a concussive blast. The windows of Class 1A shattered outwards simultaneously, raining glass down onto the campus below. The chalkboards cracked down the middle. Ida was thrown backward off his feet, slamming into a desk, while Uraraka cried out, covering her ears as she was pushed back by the sheer force of the air displacement. Aizawa's capture scarf instantly shot out, wrapping not around Izuku, but around Ida and Uraraka, pulling them back toward the doorway, out of the danger zone. Izuku slapped both of his hands over his mouth, his eyes wide with absolute horror. He had just attacked his friends with his voice. I'm sorry! Izuku mumbled through his hands, the muffled sounds still shaking the remaining desks. I'm sorry! Get out! Please, get away from me! Ida groggily got to his feet, holding his ribs. He looked at Izuku, and for the first time, Izuku saw genuine, unmasked terror in his friend's eyes. Ida grabbed Uraraka's arm. We should go, Uraraka, Ida said quietly, pulling the crying girl out into the hallway. The door slid shut, leaving Izuku alone with Aizawa. Izuku slowly slid down the back wall until he hit the floor, curling into a tight ball, his hands still clamped over his mouth. He was crying, the tears instantly turning to steam against his skin. Aizawa walked forward, stopping just outside the static field. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell Izuku it was going to be okay. He understood that lying to the boy would be the cruelest thing he could do. They don't understand, Midoriya, Aizawa said quietly. They want to be good friends. But human biology is hardwired to fear the apex predator. And right now, you are the apex predator of the entire human race. You cannot force them to override their survival instincts. I'm all alone, Izuku wept into his hands. I have everything I ever wanted, and I'm entirely alone. While Izuku mourned in the ruins of his classroom, a different kind of breakdown was occurring in the boys' restroom at the end of the hall. Katsuki Bakugo stood in front of the mirrors above the sinks. The bathroom was empty. He had locked the door. He stared at his reflection. He looked the same. His uniform was immaculate. His eyes were sharp. But inside, he felt like an empty shell. He raised his hands, looking at his palms. They were calloused, scarred, sweating the nitroglycerin-like substance that fueled his explosions. He had spent his entire life honing his quirk. He had pushed himself to the absolute limit. He was a prodigy. He was destined to be number one. Bakugo ignited his palms. Small, fierce explosions crackled in the bathroom, echoing off the tile. He watched the fire dance. Flick! The memory of the stadium played in his mind. The deafening silence. The atmospheric displacement. The utter annihilation of the arena. Bakugo slammed his flaming fists into the porcelain sink. The basin shattered, water spraying everywhere. Damn it! Bakugo roared, his voice cracking. He punched the mirror. The glass broke, fracturing his reflection into a dozen distorted pieces. His hand bled, but he didn't care. Damn it, damn it, damn it! He fell to his knees in the puddles of water, gripping his wet hair, pulling hard enough to tear the roots. It wasn't fair. It fundamentally broke the rules of the universe. Deku, the quirkless loser, the pebble on the side of the road, had somehow acquired a power that made All Might look like a street-level thug. Bakugo breathed heavily, staring at his bleeding knuckles. I can't beat him, Bakugo whispered. The words tasted like ash and bile in his mouth. To admit defeat was to destroy his own soul. If I hit him with my strongest explosion, it wouldn't even singe his clothes. If he hits me, if he touches me, I'll die. He remembered sitting in the classroom today. When Deku walked in, Bakugo's body had betrayed him. He had felt a cold, paralyzing dread grip his spine. He hadn't felt the urge to fight. He had felt the urge to run, to hide, to surrender. Katsuki Bakugo, the boy who feared nothing, was terrified of Izuku Midoriya. He slowly stood up, looking at the ruined sink. The water continued to pour out of the broken pipes. He realized then that his rivalry with Deku was over. It wasn't a rivalry anymore. You do not rival a hurricane. You do not rival an earthquake. You survive them. Bakugo wiped his bleeding hand on his pants. A dark, twisted realization settled over him. If he couldn't surpass Deku, what was his purpose? Why was he even at UA? The target on Deku's back wasn't just for villains. Deku was a target for anyone with ambition, because as long as Deku existed, no one else could ever truly be number one. Miles away, hidden beneath the neon-soaked streets of Yokohama, the atmosphere in the League of Villains hideout was suffocatingly tense. Tamura Shigaraki sat on his stool at the bar, hunched over, his red eyes bloodshot and unblinking. On the television screen in front of him, the footage of Izuku Midoriya's singularity event played on a continuous loop. Flick. Annihilation. Flick. Annihilation. It's a glitch, Shigaraki muttered rapidly, his dry, cracked lips barely moving. He scratched at his neck, the skin raw and bleeding, blood trickling down his collarbone. It's a corrupted save file. You can't put a level 999 boss in the tutorial. The player character is supposed to level up slowly. I'm supposed to level up. This is cheating. Kurojairi stood perfectly still, his misty form wavering slightly. He had never seen Tamura this broken. The young villain had been arrogant, impulsive, and full of hate. But now, he was gripped by pure, unadulterated despair. Tamura Shigaraki, Kurojairi said softly. Perhaps we should focus on acquiring new assets. The Vanguard Action Squad. Assets? Shigaraki snapped, spinning around, his eyes wide and manic. What assets, Kurojairi? Muscular? Dabi? Toga? If I send the entire Vanguard at that kid, he'll vaporize them before they can blink. My decay requires me to touch him. If I get within 50 feet of him, the air pressure he projects will rip my arms off. The game is over. We lost. Suddenly, the heavy, metallic breathing echoed through the room. The monitor on the wall flared to life. The audio visualizer pulsed with the deep, terrifying voice of All for One. You have not lost, Tamura, All for One said. His voice was smooth, calming, but underlaid with a chilling, predatory edge. You are merely looking at the board incorrectly. You see an invincible boss. I see a fragile glass cannon, loaded with a nuclear payload, but aimed by a child. Shigaraki stopped scratching his neck. He looked up at the monitor. Master, he's stronger than All Might. He is, All for One agreed, a hint of dark amusement in his tone. He is the culmination of my brother's legacy. He has reached the absolute apex of physical power. But Tamura, power without the vessel to contain it is not strength. It is a curse. Deep within his life support chamber, hidden in a secure facility miles away, All for One smiled beneath his mask. His sightless face was turned toward the ceiling, seeing not the metal roof, but the grand tapestry of his century-long war. I have fought one for all for generations, AFO explained, his voice echoing in the bar. Each user was stronger than the last. But they all shared a common weakness. They were human. They had morals. They had attachments. They cared about the cardboard world they lived in. All for One leaned forward slightly in his chair. This boy, Izuku Midoriya, possesses the power to shatter the earth. But his mind is the mind of a gentle, timid, heroic teenager. He is terrified of himself. He is isolating himself. He is currently employing 99% of his immense power just to keep himself from destroying the people he loves. So what? Shigaraki asked, his brow furrowed. He's still a god chained by his own morality, All for One countered. We do not need to overpower him, Tamira. We simply need to break his chains. We need to put him in a situation where he is forced to act, where he cannot calculate his movements, where he must unleash that power recklessly. All for One paused, his breathing apparatus hissing rhythmically. Dr. Garaki, All for One said, addressing someone off-screen. Another voice, old, wheezing, and gleefully mad, joined the audio feed. Yes, Lord All for One, the High-End Nomus. The prototypes you have been developing. The ones with hyperregeneration and multiple quirk factors. They are not fully stabilized, my lord, the doctor replied, a hint of hesitation in his voice. Hood is perhaps 70% complete. The others, they are feral. If released now, they will burn themselves out in hours. That is all the time we need, All for One commanded. I am changing the timeline. I intended to let Tamira grow, to let All Might fade away in peace before I struck. But this boy, if he is allowed to master this power, if he learns to throttle the singularity, my empire will end. All for One's voice turned utterly cold, devoid of any fatherly warmth. We strike now. While he is unstable. While he is terrified. Tamira, gather your vanguard action squad. Doctor, prepare the Hyans. We will assault the UE training camps. We will throw an army of monsters at the boy. Shigaraki's eyes widened. But master, the boy will kill them all. He'll destroy the Hyans. Yes, All for One purred. He will. But to do so, he will have to unleash his power. He will lose control. He will destroy the surrounding area. He will cause collateral damage. He will terrify his classmates. We will put civilians in his path. We will force him to choose between saving one life and destroying 100. All for One's cruel laughter filled the room. We will not kill Izuku Midoriya, Tamira. We will force him to become a monster in the eyes of society. We will make the world demand his execution, and when the heroes turn on their own god, we will offer him a place among the demons. Shigaraki stared at the screen, a slow, twisted smile spreading across his cracked lips. The despair evaporated, replaced by a dark, malicious purpose. The game wasn't broken. The objective had just changed from defeat the boss to corrupt the boss. Understood, Master, Shigaraki whispered. Back at UA, the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Izuku Midoriya remained at his tungsten desk long after the rest of his classmates had quickly and quietly exited the room. He didn't want to walk the halls while they were crowded. He didn't want to see the fear in the eyes of the general education students, or the wary glares of the third years. He sat in the silence of the shattered classroom. The wind blew through the broken windows, rustling his hair. Aizawa stood at the front of the room, leaning against his podium, waiting patiently. Sensei, Izuku asked, his booming voice quieter now, filled with profound exhaustion. How long do I have to live like this? Aizawa looked at the boy. He could lie. He could say it would get better with time, that they would find a support item, a quirk counselor, a solution. But Aizawa was a pragmatist. He knew the truth. Forever, Midoriya, Aizawa said softly. This is your life now. You must adapt, or you must lock yourself away. Izuku looked down at his glowing, crackling hands. The green lightning arced over his skin, beautiful and terrifying. He thought of Todoroki's fire. He thought of All Might's smile. He thought of the first user's words in the void. Will you carry the weight of our power, to save the boy in front of you, and the world beyond? He had accepted the burden. He couldn't return it now. Okay, Izuku whispered. He closed his eyes, focusing on the microscopic movements of his muscles, preparing himself for the agonizing walk back to his titanium cage. I'll adapt. I have to. Outside, the sun began to set, casting long, dark shadows over the UA campus. The world continued to spin, unaware that the scales of power had been irreversibly tipped. Izuku Midoriya had become the strongest being on the planet, but as he slowly, carefully stood up from his desk, terrified of breaking the floor, he had never felt weaker. The target on his back was painted in glowing, emerald light, and the monsters in the dark were already sharpening their knives.